So good morning, brothers. I just woke up this morning and I saw this video on Fox News discussing UFOs. So I thought it'd just be a good topic to, just bring out some things. But anyway, let's get this video started.
Oh, another UFO segment. That's crazy. You'd have to be crazy to believe that's possible. Really? Is it any crazier than what's coming out of, say, your average White House briefing? No, it really isn't. So with
And it's not actually crazy at all for those of you brothers who don't understand. The U.S. government has known about UFOs for a very long time now, since the 1940s, maybe even prior to that. But the main reason why they keep that information hidden, at least until now, is because they understand, according to biblical prophecy, that what those chariots slash UFOs are really about.
with that in mind, a fascinating conference today about UFOs and nuclear weapons that took place in Washington. At it, a U.S. Air Force captain called David Shindeli said he was part of an incident in which a UFO disabled 10 nuclear ICBM missiles. Here's part of what he said.
There has been a long history of UFO incidents and encounters, with much investigation of them from 1947 and even earlier.
And that year, 1947, is actually a very pivotal, important year when it comes to research and understanding of what UFOs were about. During the late 1940s, so 1947, all the way up to 1952, the U.S. government were discovering many different UFOs in different sites, so like New Mexico, the desert of Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. And the amount of evidence they were finding was so damning that they realized it wasn't a coincidence. This isn't just made up shit. So we have to do additional research to figure out what these sightings are about. So back in 1947, a special team of America's top scientists, they came together to study the issues of the UFO. It was called Project Sign. Now, Project Sign later became Project Grudge in 1948. Then after that, in 1952, Project Grudge became Project Blue Book, and that ran officially at least from 1952 to 1969. Project Blue Book's goal was to see if the UFOs, or quote unquote the spaceships, if they were a threat to U.S. national security, and also to study them to see if they could replicate their technology, which they actually have to a certain degree, and because of the technology that they've studied from the UFOs, we're able to enjoy a lot of the technology that we have today, believe it or not. Also, one of the goals of that Project Blue Book was also to disseminate disinformation, because after the completion of Project Blue Book, they had after it ended, they had collected evidence on over 12,000 UFOs, but the conclusions that at least they released to the public during that time was that it was all misidentified, meaning what? It was either some type of conventional aircraft, a cloud, a star, etc. So basically, that project, its goal was to collect information for the U.S. government at the time to understand what UFOs were about, while also hiding the true information through misinformation. But going back to the year 1947, that was also an important year, because it was during that year that President Truman established the Central Intelligence Group, which would later be called the CIA. So in 1947, President Truman, through an executive order, established that Central Intelligence Group. And it was during those early years of investigating UFOs, so like the late 1940s, the 50s, the 60s, that the Central Intelligence Group, which was later the CIA, as well as the U.S. Military, they overseed a lot of the information or excuse me, not the U.S. military, the U.S. Air Force. They oversee a lot of the information when it came to quote unquote UFOs. And then also later on, Truman established what was called the National Security Council, or the NSC, in 1947. Truman also established the NSA, which you brothers know as the National Security Agency. Now, those three different agencies, the NSA, the NSC, and the CIA, are what are what basically are the gatekeepers when it comes to a lot of the information when it comes to aliens and UFOs. Even the presidents today, they're on a need to know basis when it comes to information on UFOs, things like that. That's why, for any of you brothers who watched, you saw that one interview where Joe Biden was laughing when people were asking him about UFOs. I mean, if he still has the mental capacity to even discuss those topics, he wouldn't even be able to go in depth on it because there's a lot of things that he's not told about just for national security purposes. Now, I also forgot to mention how the Central Intelligence Group eventually became the CIA. That was established because of the National Security Act, which happened in 1947, which again also established the National Security Council as well. So all these agencies, the CIA, the National Security Council, and the National Security Agency, the NSA, they all work together when it comes to this UFO quote unquote alien cover up. And the cover up was also very deep as well. For those of you brothers who have ever heard of Secretary of Defense James Forrestal, now James Forrestal was actually against a lot of the cover ups when it came to UFO information. And due to that, he was classified as mentally ill and he was stationed at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Of course, after some time, his brother basically let authorities know that I'm getting my brother out of this hospital, and they said no problem. Come to find out, by the time he gets there, they let him know that, oh yeah, unfortunately your brother committed suicide. He hopped out a window allegedly. But that was just one of the reasons why James Forrestal was killed. Another reason is because he wanted to, out a lot of the secret Nazi agents that were a part of the U.S. government, due to things like Operation Paperclip and Operation Rat Run. Now, the person who basically spearhead that witch hunt after him was a person named Joseph McCarthy. And I'm sure a lot of you brothers who went to school in elementary, middle, and high school are aware of Joseph McCarthy and the term McCarthyism, how, his job was basically to hunt out a lot of the Nazi agents that were hidden in the U.S. government. Of course, in the quote unquote education system, we're taught that Joseph McCarthy was a conspiracy theorist, a wacko, and all these crazy things. But no, no, no. Everything that Joseph McCarthy was saying and trying to let the people know is true. And the reason why we're taught today that it's lies is because the public education system is mainly just a tool of propaganda. And believe it or not, it's been like that since its inception. But yeah, let me continue the video.
September of 1966, I was a Minuteman ICBM Launch Control Officer and Deputy Commander of a launch crew stationed at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. I was involved in a UFO incident at that time where a flying object tampered with and took down a total of 10 nuclear-tipped ICBM missiles by rendering them unlaunchable.
And I just want to pause there because believe it or not, stories like this happen to people especially in the U.S. Air Force all the time, especially if you've done any research. The things happen in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But what normally happens is, they see something crazy. They get pulled up into the inner office, with a top general or ranking official. They'll just be like, okay, we're going to put you on administrative leave. You just take a break. You didn't see anything. And that's essentially what happened and what's been happening for the last 4 decades. Now, due to the Freedom of Information Act, a lot of the information is starting to slowly come out. And also, they just want to get the people more mentally prepped for that eventual battle against the angelic forces.
Tom Rogan is one of the rare serious journalists, actual journalists, in Washington who's been on this story for years in a very rigorous way. He's a columnist now with the Washington Examiner. He was following the conference today. He joins us tonight for a recap. Tom, thanks a lot for coming on. So what did you learn today?
I want to go back real quick.
On the story for years in a very rigorous way. He's a columnist now with the Washington Examiner.
Now you see how this UFO looks like, how it's like a disc, kind of like a wheel. For those of you brothers who have read the scriptures, particularly Ezekiel, the first chapter, how it mentions, the wheel within the wheel, and how the quote unquote cherubim could move that wheel using their mind. This is essentially a perfect image of what it looked like. When it talks about, the eyes of that wheel, you see the underparts of the UFO, those lights represents the quote unquote eyes of the wheel of the chariot. So the US government has known for a long time that UFOs are basically manned by the angels of the Lord. Let me continue.
Following the conference today, he joins us tonight for a recap. Tom, thanks a lot for coming on. So what did you learn today at this event?
Thanks, Tucker. Yeah, I think the key point here is that although these gentlemen have been telling their stories for a while, now they are doing it in a fashion where they can finally be taken seriously by more people. And fortunately, there weren't that many journalists there today, but there were more perhaps than there have been. I think the key point, though, is that people with some of the highest security clearances at the height of the Cold War for the US Air Force, multiple different individuals at multiple different sites across a period of decades, say that UFOs interacted with nuclear weapons platforms and either rendered them inoperable or took them offline. And so something was done by a technological force, as these officers would suggest, that cannot be explained. And that in and of itself surely.
Well, before I explain that image, let me elaborate on what he just said about the quote unquote UFOs. Not only do they have the capacity to shut down nuclear technology, the ruling powers already understand that they're also capable of unleashing nuclear technology as well. So, for example, if you brothers have never heard of this event, you should look this up. It's called the Tunguska event. So this happened back in 1908. It was a massive explosion, about 1,200 square miles. This happened in an area of Tunguska, Siberia, which today is a part of modern Russia. Eyewitnesses that saw the event noticed how they saw basically a flaming cylindrical kind of vehicle or ship, essentially a UFO. Now, at first, because our technology wasn't that advanced yet, people weren't able to understand what caused that explosion. But after years of research, they were able to determine that the explosion was nuclear in nature. How they were able to do that, they essentially compared the destruction patterns, like how the Earth was devastated in that area in Tunguska, with the explosion at Hiroshima as well as Nagasaki. By comparing those two, they were able to come to the conclusion that yes, not these UFOs, these quote unquote space vehicles do have nuclear power. Now, actually, let me play.
Should be big news worthy of serious further investigation.
Now, when it comes to this image, you see how it's kind of like cloud-like in its appearance. That's why, if y'all brothers read the scriptures, especially Matthew the 24th chapter, it says how Jesus Christ, or better known as Yahweh Shai for you brothers who understand the Paleo Hebrew, how he's going to come down with the clouds with great wrath and fury, and how he's going to gather the elect. Also, another good book for you brothers to look into, for those who are not aware, it's a book called by, I believe, Norman Begram. It's called Ringmakers of Saturn. Now, in that book, Ringmakers of Saturn, he actually details how their specific electromagnetic vehicles that are quote unquote basically creating the rings of Saturn, and how he describes the look of these vehicles. They're surrounded by a quote unquote cloud-like apparatus. But I'll touch more into that in part two.
Well, by definition, I mean, any force that can take America's nuclear weapons offline is something you need to worry about. Presumably the Pentagon has been looking at this, assessed it. Have they given any indication of what they think happened?
What's, I think, unfortunate, and I guess we're at the start of a process, the Director of National Intelligence had this report, but what's unfortunate is the government does know that there is a nuclear connection. They've kept that classified. Frankly, I can understand why some of it is classified, but they should come clean with a lot more that they know. I mean, the simple fact, right, the U.S. Navy, why does the Navy keep seeing these things with the aircraft carriers? Well, aircraft carriers are nuclear powered. Why do submarines see them? Nuclear connection. This nuclear missile incidents from the Cold War, there's credible testimony from a great historian on this, Robert Hastings, who wrote a book, UFOs and Nukes, to suggest that the Soviets had similar experiences.
Yes.
Something is going on here. It's not America, it's not China, it's not Russia, and we need to get a grip.
And actually, before I forget, there's also another good book for you brothers who never heard. It's called A War in Space. So this book, War in Space, details how essentially the U.S. government, as well as other governments in the world, when they're quote unquote establishing those satellites in space, those satellites are actually armed with weaponry because they understand, according to biblical prophecy, that Christ is going to return back on the scene to essentially destroy the earth with nuclear fire. By the way, for you brothers who don't understand, quote unquote hell is not a place where you quote unquote die and suffer for eternity through burning fire. The word hell in the Bible just means Sheol, which is the grave. So when you read in the Old Testament about quote unquote hell, it's just talking about death or the grave. Now in the New Testament, that word hell or hellfire represents the word Genha. And that word Genha is in reference to the, I believe it's like the valley of Genha, where during that time, the Israelites would essentially put a lot of their trash and burn it. So that's what the New Testament represents when it's talking about hell or hellfire. But essentially, the trash, which is all the people who don't understand the truth of the scriptures and who are basically Christ isn't coming back to save, are going to be burned and destroyed with that nuclear fire. That's what hell really is, and that's what the lake of fire essentially is as well. It's not something that is literally going to last forever. It's just described poetically in those terms because of the great destruction that comes with it. That's why for a lot of you brothers who ever read the book of Titus in the New Testament, it even describes the fire of Sodom and Gomorrah, how it was a quote unquote eternal fire, because Sodom and Gomorrah, just like how Christ is going to destroy this earth in the future, Sodom and Gomorrah was also destroyed by thermonuclear fire.
Grip and take it seriously instead of laughing it off as an issue for crazy people.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of crazy people in this world right now. I would say the people who take this seriously may be among the least crazy in our public conversation. You're certainly in that category. Right. Tom Rogan, appreciate it.
And I agree with you, brother. People who do take this seriously are the least crazy. But that's because they understand the truth and their mind has been freed from the shackles of this fake-ass society. Now, just one more thing I want to go into before I'll close this part one. A lot of the information on aliens and UFOs, the government, especially the CIA, they actually hide it in quote unquote science fiction books. For example, you brothers can look up a book, Majestic. That book, Majestic, I believe it goes over in a quote unquote alien crash landing, as well as a communication that happened, I believe, in New Mexico. But anyway, essentially, even though it's written as a science fiction book, a lot of the events are based on real life events, and that isn't limited to that book. A lot of books that are labeled as science fiction today are actually based on real life events. They just change the name of the places and sometimes the name of the people. Now, in regard to a lot of these journalists who do touch on UFOs, some of them are sincere and are just trying to come into a understanding the truth. However, a lot of them are just government agents, usually from the CIA, that are meant to send out disinformation to confuse the vast majority of people. That's the society we live in. So much information is pumped out from so many different sources that it's hard for a person to come to a true understanding of the truth unless, the Most High has just blessed you with a clear mind and a spirit, and you're able to basically pick apart the meat from the bones.
You're coming on tonight and covering this. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Hey, Sean Hannity here.
But yeah, brothers, that's just going to be the end of part one of this video. I'm going to discuss a few more things in part two.